Hi, everyone. Welcome to Your Career Unscripted. I'm your host, Jane Bernhard, and I interview business leaders and rising leaders on their career path to inspire young professionals to build a career on their own terms. And I am very excited to have Yvoire Whittaker today. Yvoire and I went to Columbia Business School together. So happy to have you on the show. One of the last memories I have of us is when you showed me how to make PowerPoint presentations at a coffee shop. Do you remember that?
No, but it's funny because everyone's always asking me, can you help me build a deck? And I'm like, I didn't know that many people ask.
You didn't help me build a deck. You taught me how to use PowerPoint. You taught me how to build a deck. So thank you for that. And before we get into the interview portion, I'm just going to share a bit about Yvoire. Your background is so impressive. I'm so excited to have you here. Born in Plano, Texas, raised with the richness of her Ghanaian roots and shaped by world-class institutions and elite boardrooms, Yvoire is a force. So true. She's a first generation Ghanaian-American woman who carries both her heritage and ambition with equal grace. She began her career solving complex problems as a human capital strategy consultant at Deloitte, then took a bold step choosing to realign her path with her passions. That led her to Columbia Business School, where she pivoted into the world of brand marketing. And today she's not just in the room, she's shaping the narrative. She's a brand marketing manager at Nike, one of the most iconic brands in the world, where she gets to fuse creativity, culture, and strategy at the highest level. But beyond the title, she's someone who inspires through intentionality, cultural insight, and an undeniable drive to build brands that move people. I love your bio. It's amazing.
No, thank you so much. I love how you read it. Very on point. So I appreciate it. I appreciate the intro. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so happy to talk to you. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you. And also, just when I read your bio, it's just the way you wrote it is very inspiring. Your story is very inspiring. And I'd love to hear about your story from you. I know about it because we've talked a bunch, but if you could talk us through some of the chapters in your career. I
Mhm.
just mentioned some of them, but I'm curious to learn about the different chapters of your career and also what you learned from each chapter.
Yeah, so I feel like growing up, my chapter was very much so third culture kid, which is like a phrase a lot of kids use whose parents are immigrants, where you kind of grow up thinking that you can be one of three things and one of three things only, which is a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. And so growing up, I always thought I was going to be a doctor. My brother took on the lawyer piece. There's only two of us, so no engineer in the family. And my whole life growing up, I thought I was going to be a doctor. I was passionate about it. I couldn't see myself doing anything else. I became a CNA. When I went to undergrad, I was pre-med. And, undergrad is the time where you like really discover yourself. You learn so much about who you are, what you like, what you don't like, who your friends are, your identity. And the more and more I took my pre-med classes, I was just so drained, so unmotivated, and also just not doing well in class when I was a straight A student. And I wasn't doing well not because I didn't get the material, but I didn't want to get the material. I didn't have motivation to focus or study or do all of the things which required passion in order to excel. And so that phase of my life was kind of like a phase of like obedience and following the path that was set out for me, and living my parents' dream and like fulfilling that because they sacrificed everything for me to have a good life. And then I kind of hit a crossroads where I was just kind of like, I don't want to do this. How do I do something that's authentic to me, without crushing my parents' hearts, knowing I was inevitably going to crush their hopes and dreams and all of the things that they came to this country for. But what I realized what was so important was happiness, joy, and fulfillment. And I had to sit there before I even like shared with my parents, like, hey, I don't want to do this thing anymore, which was also like towards the end of my undergrad career. It wasn't in the middle. It was very much so senior year when I'm like supposed to be taking the MCAT and applying. I knew I needed to not break the news to them and just kind of leave them with that news, but also present a plan to them to let them know, like, hey, it's okay. Like, I got myself, I can handle myself. So I spent a lot of time in a phase of like rediscovering who I am and my passions, and recognize what the things that I was doing outside of class. And a lot of the things I was volunteering to do were aligned with, marketing and all of those things. And I was like, okay, I think this is kind of what I want. But again, it was senior year, there was no time. And so I ran into a consultant, or I met a consultant who was kind of like, consulting's kind of what you do when you don't know what you want to do, because it's such a generalist industry. And I was just kind of, I was still on the fence of like, I don't know about marketing. Like, I don't even know what it is really. Like, there was no chance for me to, experience it at all. And so I decided, I'm like, let me just go all full force into like recruiting for consulting. And that was the plan I came up with myself. I then started at Deloitte upon graduation. Again, it was a really, really good experience, but very quickly I knew this isn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So I used that time to learn, grow exponentially, and really like further understand what it is that I loved. Again, rediscovered marketing, did a global rebrand for a client, and I was like, okay, well, I don't know what marketing is. I just think I know. And that's when I decided to go back to school, go to business school, pivot your career. And now I'm here at Nike, working in brand marketing and loving it. And it's exactly what I wanted, and where I wanted to be at this point in my career. And just a story of like, follow your heart, follow your passions, listen to yourself, and don't be afraid to take risks and try new things and disappoint your parents.
Thank you for walking us through that. I really appreciate you highlighting like the growing pains and the self-discovery when you're in a place of I don't feel like what I'm doing is right. And I feel like sometimes, at least when I've been in those spaces of like, what I'm currently doing doesn't feel right, the leap to figuring out the next thing can be so hard and so painful and so like, am I going to figure out something? Like, is there something for me that will make me feel fulfilled? And so that's something that people ask me about a lot, is like what questions do you ask yourself to figure
Mhm.
out
Mhm.
what you actually want to do? And also, like, how do you feel encouraged in the moments when you're not happy with your current path? So I'm just
Yep.
curious, in those moments for you when you were kind of in the in between of, okay, I know what I'm currently doing doesn't feel good, but I don't know the exact next step.
Mhm.
What kept you going? What made you feel inspired? And if you have advice to someone who's struggling in that moment right now.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's a great question. You mentioned like a lot of people come to you and ask, what questions do you ask yourself? And it's a very valid question, because it's like, what questions do you ask yourself? And it's just like, I don't know what to ask myself. And I remember in those moments of like life changes, from pre-med to consulting, from consulting to marketing, from New York to Portland, like all of those big life changes where you don't know what's coming up. Like, how can you really ask yourself the right questions? How can you even answer them when you do go get a question? And for me, it was actually just not asking any questions and just like sitting in silence and just allowing yourself to think and process, not necessarily like strategically or about anything in specifically, but like, what is coming to you naturally? Like, what do you drift towards? Like, what makes you laugh? What makes you smile? What makes you angry? Who do you want to be like? Who inspires you? And I guess these are questions I was asking myself, but you don't even recognize. But like sitting with your own thoughts and just doing what you want to do, like when you start doing things that bring you joy, that bring you peace, that you do because there's no strings attached, there's no money attached, but it just fills you intrinsically. How do you take those moments and those experiences and translate it into a career? because there is a career for everything. There is some way to monetize everything in this capitalistic society. But I think like if you can root your career in what your heart truly values and desires, like you will enjoy your career so much more when you're doing it. Obviously, with any career, like you're gonna have frustrations, setbacks, disappointments, and all of those things. But at the core of it, you know, you will still be motivated to get up and go to work, because the worst thing that I've experienced and when I knew I needed a change was when I would wake up and, you know, just feel like I was being repetitive, I wasn't being challenged, I was bored, or, you know, I was just like miserable. And I think at that those are feelings and emotions that you want to listen to and recognize. When you're feeling those feelings, because then you need to sit with yourself, reevaluate, and really understand where you are and where you want to go, and plan accordingly from there.
I think that's beautiful advice. Like, really taking the time to give yourself the space to have that free thinking. It's like, to be creative and really figure out what you need, you kind of need space.
Yeah.
In talking about figuring out your passions and what makes you happy, I know you're very passionate about fashion, culture, storytelling. I would love to hear about what is inspiring to you about all those things, and also why you've decided to like build your career in those spaces.
Yeah, I think, well, Nike's a perfect place that blends all of those things together. And, you know, the root of it all is sport. And I'm a very competitive person, not necessarily in sports, but I like to, I compete with myself. I compete with the car next to me, you know, sometimes, or, but it's something that's in my nature. And so Nike does a really good job of blending all of those things. I would say my passion for fashion, which I believe was my first like true love, actually came from my mom. And I believe her passion for fashion came from her mother. And my mom has always been, sometimes to a point where, you know, it's like too much. But there have been times where, you know, my mom raised me and always made sure I was thinking about the way I'm presenting myself and dressing. And, you know, for a long time, it frustrated me because I'm like, you know, this is so pretentious. Who cares, right? But I started to then grow up and understand the psychological effects that, you know, first impressions have, or the way something's put together, not just with your clothes and fashion, but just like how things can be presented on a table, or how things can be presented in a store and things like that. And visual design, whether on body, off body, in a empty space, became something that was so intriguing to me. Even if it was packaging of, you know, a Cheetos bag, or packaging of a drink on the shelves at Walmart, I was so drawn into the way things looked and how they're presented. And then from there, distilling it down to the fashion piece in terms of how you dress, like I feel like something that's always really excited me was being able to express myself through the way I wear things, how I layer things, the colors that I wear. I was always the girl in undergrad who had the pink suit, and everybody else had black, navy, and gray suits. And I didn't care. I didn't care if that said I was less professional, because I knew I wasn't. But that is who I am. I wasn't purposefully trying to stand out. I wasn't using it as a tactic or strategy. It was, this is how I want to dress, and it's still professional, and it just has some color, because that is reflective of who I am and my personality, and how I want to present in the world. And so it's always been a statement for me to kind of like highlight who I am without saying too much. But it really stems from my mom, who she loves fashion, and she loves, you know, wearing heels to work every day, and hats. And her mom, my grandmother, loves bangles and necklaces and all of those things. And so just growing up with that influence in the house and seeing that had like a big effect on me in terms of how I watched it. And then growing up, I watched America's Next Top Model all the time. I forced my brother to sit down and watch it with me. We were watching Project Runway, all of those things, and it just further fueled my desire to like be in like a fashion type space.
I love hearing how much you embrace your uniqueness and your boldness. I think that's really inspiring and empowering. In talking about culture, I know you're Ghanaian-American. I saw in your bio you work on projects to stimulate the economy in Ghana, and I wanted to ask about that. I wanted to ask,
Yeah.
what do you work on? Like, what is motivating you, and what impact do you want to have in that area?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I went to Ghana when I was first in the fourth grade. And then ever since I graduated undergrad, I've been going back more often. I make my own money now. I don't have to depend on my parents for taking me back home. Actually, my family, my parents and my brother, all my family lives there. So it's home for me. And it's home. It's truly home to my parents. They grew up there. That's where they're from. And so when I went for the first time, I was very like, it's a culture shock. It's nothing like the United States. And I remember just feeling like this connection of like, I'm supposed to do something here. And then maybe it was, if it's 2025, like 3, 4 years ago, I was working with a mentor of mine. His name is Kai Cunningham, and he has a venture capitalist firm called Limited Ventures, and I was supporting him because I was also thinking about VC at the time as well, like going into business school. Just in case marketing wasn't the thing that I thought I wanted. I was just trying to keep my aperture open and really understand what was exciting me. So one of the paths I was also considering was venture capital, and Kai went to Ghana, and he started talking about like opportunities he was seeing to like give back. And with my family being from there, and being connected in the country, me I him and I like worked together to come up and co-create something called the West Africa Innovation Fund. We partnered with Fidelity Bank of Ghana, the biggest bank in Ghana, to do this. And essentially it was a fund for high net worth individuals in Ghana to invest in, get access to pre IPO deals here in the Western Hemisphere in the US at a discount. And what would happen was they would get it at a discount where like their dollar equals $2, $3, etc. And the profit that they made from those investments post IPO would then bleed or get pumped back into the infrastructure and the economy within Ghana. And so it was a way to democratize and give them access to potentially successful companies here in the US that they wouldn't have access to then create wealth in their country back home. So that was one thing. It ended up falling through for several different reasons, but that work was really what rooted me in like, I'm passionate about um, this area, and giving back, and creating wealth for the continent as a whole, but specifically starting in Ghana. And then right now, like I have some side projects that I'm working on, one with my family in terms of like coming up with a tourism and transportation business, and then helping my brother as well, as he wants to start a hospitality business in Ghana as well. So just figuring out ways to create spaces and services that serve the local consumer, that provide value to them but also don't price them out of their own, system.
That's really beautiful. I also think it's interesting that you're working at Nike, but you also have this entrepreneurial mindset by doing your own things as well, which I think is really interesting balancing those. Do you feel like going to business school helped cultivate that mindset? Do you feel like you always had this, oh, I like doing different things, like you're passionate about marketing, but you mentioned some other things you're doing as well.
Mhm.
Did being in business school inspire you in different ways?
Yeah. I think business school inspired me in so many ways. Like, I think the obvious answer are the classes. We took negotiations. I don't know if we were in the same negotiations class. I can't remember, but
I don't
I had a
think we were.
ball.
What'd
It
you
was
say?
it was so fun, like just being able to like scenario play. And then, there was another class I really enjoyed called Top Down Management. It was really the elective classes that really inspired me because I'm a structured type of girl. So like understanding how to learn, in the real world in a structured environment that necessarily wasn't like economics or statistics, but were really applicable to like the things that you were doing, gave me the structure, the framework, to now take all of that and apply it to things that I have to do every single day. But then also the people were like really inspiring. In our it wasn't a cohort, we had a cluster. I feel
Cluster
so
D.
old. In our cluster there were so many impressive people, and their stories just inspired me, where it's just like you don't have to work a 9 to 5 and like that's it, but you also don't have to overwork yourself, but you can really do anything that you want to do. And I think obviously, like, you hear inspiring stories all of the time, like on Instagram or on TV, and it's like, yeah, 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 that's cool. Like, I will never meet that person. You know what I mean? But like sitting next to somebody who's doing something just as impressive as like the billionaire or millionaire you see on TV, and just talking to them and understanding the micro steps that they take, understanding the access and the tools that they have and that's needed, they don't realize they're even breaking it down for you, giving you a playbook, giving you the unlock to like how to do all of these things. And it becomes that more impactful in addition to being inspiring. But it allows you to then take your dreams and really put them to action rather than just dreaming them, while sitting by someone who has done it tried and true, and they can really like coach you. And it's not free because you pay to go, but it's like, this is what business school is for, and so I think the classmates, and the fact that they were my age, and it really like takes you into a different world and puts you in a different mindset to have that drive to like be entrepreneurial, where something you might see on YouTube or just on social media might seem like out of touch, or not a linear way in terms of how to get there.
I completely agree. I feel like learning from people who had such different backgrounds and just having people from so many different backgrounds in the same space and being able to talk to so many different people, that was such a beautiful way to learn. So while we were in business school, you worked at Nike. You did your MBA internship at Nike. I know that program, the Marketing Vanguard program, is very, very competitive. And I think people would be really interested to learn about the program, what you're doing. I believe it's a rotational program, but I'm just curious to learn what skills you use on a day-to-day basis. I know you're working in your passion area, so
Yeah.
I'm just curious how you like it, how you spend your time, anything that you can share about what your life looks like at Nike.
Yeah, for sure. So, the Marketing Vanguard program is a program designed for business school or MBA graduates who have 0 to 3-ish years of experience in marketing. So, it's really a program designed for career pivoters, and for people who are trying to learn marketing. And you get to learn marketing in the Nike way. And Nike is one of the best marketing companies there is out there. So it's a 2-year program. You go through 6 rotations, all within the function of marketing. So you start in brand planning, then you do brand management, digital marketing, and retail marketing, which are like the 4 big hitters within marketing. There are so many, or at Nike, there are so many others like paid media, affiliates, like so many other things, creative that you can do. But there's only time for 4. And so each rotation is 6 months each. And so you go through all of the 4 that I just mentioned for 6 months at a time. And at the end of the program, it's a guaranteed placement in a function within marketing on a team of your interests, hopefully, within like the different categories that Nike offers. And essentially, like, what you're supposed to get out of it is being a well-rounded, empathetic leader who's been able to see different corners of how the business works and operates and executes from a marketing perspective. That way, when you do serve in one area of it only, you know how all of the others work. You know how you know the goals and the motivations of other teams. That way, you can now better influence and understand how everything comes together to achieve one common goal. So, the purpose is to make you at long term a better marketing leader, more empathetic marketing leader. And I would say the skill sets in this that's required in this for to be successful in this rotation is really, really be curious. You only have 6 months. 6 months is not a lot of time on the timeline of Nike in terms of when something goes from idea to execution can take like 2 years, right? So if you're on something for 6 months, like you don't have time to start something and finish it from beginning to end. And so a lot of it is being really curious, taking advantage of the time, the access, and the opportunities to people and things and projects that you get to see, and learning and soaking up as much as you can. Because when you talk to people at the company, a lot of people have only served or worked in one area of the business. And so the value that you bring in having expertise across the business is really, really important. And so the more you ask questions, the more knowledge you have to then bring to your final placement, when you are operating as like a brand marketer. Um, so that, um, dealing with ambiguity because every it's new every 6 months, and so ambiguity of project information, lingo, people, and learning all of that. So rotational programs are meant to be educational, an educational experience. So just having that expectation and knowing that's what you're going through for like playing the long game essentially and understanding what that'll do for you in your career later.
Yeah, and so doing the rotational program, I've always been so curious about rotational programs because it is such an educational experience. I can imagine you're learning so much, and also you have to embrace a lot of change. I'm
Yeah.
sure you're growing a lot. I'm curious how you feel you've grown in the last 2 years. We chatted about how we've been at a business school for like 2 years. That's a
Yeah.
crazy. It feels
Yeah.
like a really long time, but
Yeah.
especially if you've done different functions and you're getting such a great lens into the way a company operates. I'm just curious, what have you learned so far?
Yeah, I would say I learned two really important things. I've learned so many things, but the two that I'll highlight now is I learned how to ask the right questions. And obviously, I believe in like no question is dumb. But when I say the right questions, it means how to ask questions that get you to an end goal, that get you to an outcome, that get you further closer to where you need to be, and understanding how to sit in a room, listen to information, and be able to delineate between what's important, what's not, and how to also take that information, connect the dots to something you heard last week, ask the right question between those two meetings, and put it together to come up with a solution, a plan, or something to add value to the team because you are so in and out. So that's one thing I've really learned how to do. I'll say the second thing is knowing how to talk to people. Since I have to meet a whole Nike is so big, and every team that you work on is so layered and matrixed, and you have to work with so many different teams. And again, that changes every 6 months. I spend like the first two, I spend really the first half, like 3 months, meeting everyone in that area of the business that I'm operating in, and then who works adjacent to that and who works the most
Hmm.
cross-functionally with my team. And in all of this, it's a lot of one-on-ones. I get made fun of for how many one-on-ones I have. And some people think I overdo it, but to me it's so important to know people's roles, know people so that when you're stuck and you can't solve something, you have such a broad network in terms of like who you can ask for help and get to answers quicker, and also discover information that you haven't had before. But then within those conversations, I've learned how to understand how to connect with people on a deeper level beyond work, because that improves your relationship with them. It improves how they help. It improves how they engage with you and your team and the influence that you have on them to create buy-in to get something done. And so it sounds strategic, but it is a very authentic connection to make with people that pays dividends in abundance later on.
Yeah, and then you feel like you have a team of people, even if they're not on your direct team. So I think that's great advice for people generally to
Yeah.
connect with as many people as they can. So the program's 2 years. Are you coming up to the end of the program?
I sure am. So I am coming up on the end of my 2 years. Today is actually the day where they calibrate and kind of like state our case as to what function within marketing we want to be in, where we want to go in terms of like what category we want to serve on. And then I'll find out in a few weeks. And then I'll be in a new role more permanently, and operating hopefully as a brand manager, in the brand rotation, specifically in marketing. But yeah, it was a fast 2 years. It was like 2 years business school, 2 years program. And then now I'm like real world, like there's no structure. Like I have to kind of come in and create that structure for myself and what that looks like. Like the walls are down. And so like I'm really excited and ready to see what that world looks like for me.
That is so exciting. And cool we're doing it today and you have a big day. That's really cool. I'm curious, what are you hoping for in this next chapter of
Hmm.
your career? From hearing you talking about all the relationship building you're doing and the impact you want to have, I can see you being in like a leadership role very clearly. I'm just curious. Yeah, no, it's true. I'm just curious, what are your goals for the next chapter?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing that's really important to me is to your comment about leadership is like having a good leader. I think I want to better understand the type of leader that I want to be. And I want a leader that's empowering to help me better understand that, who's invested in not just getting the work done and doing it well and creating profit for the company. That's one thing that we have to do. But also, how do they pour into me to allow me to blossom into who I'm meant to be? Whether that's similar to their leadership style or completely different, but allows me to see the potential that I have. And then I'm also really looking forward to um, hopefully working in something that I'm really, really passionate about. But even if it's not something I'm passionate about, I'm looking forward to learning something new, and being uncomfortable so that I can continue to grow and strengthen different skill sets, and understand different opportunities that can lie ahead of me and like challenges that I can go through to get me on the other side.
I love the process that you're thinking of trying to figure out what kind of leader you want to be. It comes back to the space we kind of talked about at the beginning of having like the space to think and like figure out like
Mhm.
what you want to be and how you want to carry yourself and all of those things. And so it makes sense that you would want a manager or a leader that is not just like managing workload, but also being somewhat of a mentor and helping you figure out like where you want to go.
Yeah.
Um, so we just looked forward. I want to look back.
Yeah.
If you could go back and give your younger self career advice, let's say the version of you that is frustrated doing pre med and not happy and not sure what you want to do next, what would you tell that younger version of yourself?
Oh, that's a good one. I would say I would tell her like it's okay to have doubt. It's normal. Um, push through, not because you have to, but push through to see if your initial feeling is truly what it is or if it's a phase in time. And then it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to feel frustrated. As long as you figure out what you're going to do after to get yourself to a state of happiness and joy, and not for anybody else, not to please anybody else, but for your own fulfillment. That's what I
Thank
say.
you for sharing that. No, I think that's going to be really encouraging for people to hear, and such a wonderful sentiment to do it for you.
Yeah.
This has been such a wonderful conversation. I have one final question for you.
Hit me.
One of the themes of the podcast is people really defining success for themselves and owning their own story. And I think one of the ways, at least, that I think I can figure out what I want in a career and what I think success is just by hearing different people's definitions and then seeing like what resonates with you and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious, as a way to wrap things up, what does success mean to you?
I love this question. I just started a book actually called The 10 Commandments of Wildly Successful Women. I'm not sure if you've heard of it or read
I
it.
haven't. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, I'm only on chapter 2. But chapter 1 starts out with talking about what does success even mean, and like what does success look like, because so many people, rate themselves on a scale of like not successful to successful, and they don't even know what that successful means to them. They're just going arbitrarily based off of like someone else's like look of success. So you see how all of these people are quote unquote successful, which is typically tied to like a monetary value or like fame or something like that. um but like, and growing up, that's what you think too. But I think it is important as you matriculate and like go along life to really define that for yourself. Because as I get older, like, success is a lot less about money. I took a pay cut coming from Deloitte to Nike, but I'm so much happier and I'm so much more fulfilled. And so I would say my definition of success is listening to myself, um, trying new things unapologetically in the way that looks authentic to me, and chasing my own happiness, whatever that looks like. And I would say if I can do those three things, like, I've lived a successful life. Hopefully, money falls with it. But if it doesn't and I'm happy, that's fine.
Thank you for sharing that. I so appreciate this conversation. It was so great to connect with you and
Yeah.
to be able to learn more of your story and to share your advice. I learned a lot. I'm sure other people will too as well. So thank you for the time and the wisdom and the authenticity. It means a lot, and I'm excited to share this.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I had so much fun. It was so great to catch up and chat with you over now 2 years almost.
I know, crazy, right? I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Your Career Unscripted. If something about this conversation inspired you, I'd love to know. Feel free to message me on LinkedIn at Jane Bernhard if there's a guest you'd want to hear from, or if there's a type of background you'd like to learn from, and I'll do my best to make it happen. If you enjoyed the content, please subscribe to my Substack and follow the series here. And perhaps share it with a friend who may need some words of encouragement. See you next time.